Welcome to You Decide. I'm your host, Errol Lewis, and I want to start by thanking everybody who checked out all of our content during the mayoral primary, including the 2 bonus episodes that we released. There was my talk with journalist Herson Barrero a few days before the primary, and then the crossover episode with my colleagues from the Off Topic on Politics podcast in the wee hours of the morning after the primary. I think we recorded it at like 1 a.m. As a reminder, these are all available on YouTube. You should go to youtube.com/@NY1podcasts. So this week we are going to step away from city politics and talk about the possible breakup of 2 tech giants, Alphabet, the parent company of Google, and Meta, the parent company of Facebook and Instagram and WhatsApp. A federal court recently decided, after a 10-week trial, that Google maintains an illegal monopoly when it comes to online searches. Meta is currently on trial, and in that case, the Federal Trade Commission is contending that the acquisition of Instagram and WhatsApp were anti-competitive, designed to stifle potential rivals and maintain monopoly power. So it's a lot going on here, but it's going to affect you because I know many of you use most, if not all, of those platforms. Here to explain the legal and political and commercial arguments involved is Lina Khan. She is an associate professor of law at Columbia University, and she served as chair of the Federal Trade Commission when it brought these antitrust cases. Thanks for coming in. Great to see you.
Thanks for having me.
You know what? Actually, there's a little bit of politics. This is how, when I spotted you at the Zohran Mamdani victory party, I saw you in the background there, and I was like, oh, she's here in the city. Let's see if we can get her for the podcast. Did you work on the campaign?
I did an event with Assemblymember Mamdani around, his agenda to take on corporate abuse and corporate power, and so got to know him a little bit through that.
Okay, very good. It looked like a great party, although it was not air conditioned out on that roof. So I want to ask you about, the 2 major antitrust lawsuits that I think most of my listeners will know about are U.S. versus AT&T in 1982. It's probably before everybody's time, but as an old guy, I do remember it because it led to the breakup of the Bell system. And then there was the Microsoft lawsuit that I think a lot more people would remember in the late 1990s that led to Microsoft no longer forcing PC owners to use their browser and so forth, and their search engine, which in turn led to the rise of Google. What is the harm to ordinary consumers when something like AT&T controls the phone systems, the wires, the technology completely, or when Microsoft was forcing people to use their browser?
The basic principle here is that when you have an economy where firms have to compete, they actually have to try to make services better or make their goods cheaper because they're jostling for your business. And instead, when these companies are allowed to monopolize and lock out their rivals, they no longer have to compete. And so they can become too big to care. They can start abusing that power that they have in the marketplace. And so that's why we have the antitrust laws, which are about preserving fair competition to make sure that firms are competing and that we don't have a economy that is dominated by monopolies and a handful of companies that get to call the shots.
Is it only the government that has the standing to bring that kind of a case? Because it really benefits consumers.
It can benefit consumers. It can benefit businesses, new entrants or startups that want to get in but can't because of the monopolist. So most of the antitrust laws can be brought both by the government, pursued by the government, as well as private actors. The Sherman Act, the Clayton Act, these all have private rights of action. And so it is fairly routine to see businesses or other private parties also pursue antitrust cases, although it's become very expensive and also pretty difficult for various challenges that courts have put in place.
Well, I've noticed that investors like Warren Buffett, the famous investor, talk very openly about the value of businesses that have what he calls moats, meaning barriers to entry for competition. When does a moat become an illegal monopoly?
It's a great question. So really what enforcers are looking at is, did a company achieve its dominance through locking out competitors from the market? So if you're just a really popular company because you're making good products and customers like what you're offering them and you gain significant market share, There's nothing illegal about that. But instead, if what you do is coerce your customers or coerce trading partners, if you buy up your rivals illegally to squash out the competition, if it seems like you've achieved your market position through unfair or underhanded tactics, or once you've become dominant, you're locking out other businesses from coming in, that's when you see red flags.
And unfair, or what's described as unfair, I imagine that there's like sort of case law behind that. You kind of go and look at the last 10 cases that judges ruled on?
That's right. There's, extensive case law going back a century for how courts determine what is fair versus unfair play or anti-competitive versus not.
Okay, so your agency successfully argued in court that Google's 89% share of online searches and 95% of mobile searches was not just due to technical prowess, but because of their various commercial practices. What were the things that they did that were not just sort of having a good product and straight into illegal conduct?
So this is a case that was brought by the Justice Department, their Antitrust division, and they basically laid out how Google has been able to maintain its monopoly in online search through all sorts of contractual agreements, including with phone manufacturers. Google has been the default search engine on Apple devices, for example. And if you look at all of the different places where consumers can come to do online searches, each of those entry points, Google has basically come to dominate. That is true for within the Google ecosystem, but it's also true outside the Google ecosystem, even in instances where you have Apple devices or other manufacturers. And so Google has basically made it so that other search engines have no way into the market.
Was there a point where the government and Alphabet, the parent company of Google, were encouraged to settle? I mean, generally, that's what courts want you to do, right?
So at various points, as the government is pursuing its investigation, it has to decide, is the best path here litigation? Do we believe this company has violated the law, first of all? Do we think the facts support that? And if so, do we think there could be some resolution outside of pursuing litigation? And that's something that enforcers have to take seriously, because these are taxpayer dollars, taxpayer resources, and these cases can be enormously expensive. They can be enormously time consuming. For every case that you're bringing in court, that's another case that you're not able to bring. And so you have to think about these trade-offs seriously. That said, in this case, the government decided to go to trial because, they had a strong case. The judge has now determined that Google is an illegal monopoly, even though Google was fighting that every step of the way.
And, what's so insidious about the market power conferred by a monopoly on search, in this case of Google, it gives Google vast insight into our habits and into our thinking. And they're looking at your files if you're using Google Drive, and and then they sell that information to the highest bidder so that they can send you targeted ads. Was the government arguing that there needs to be competition in that area, or was it just purely the search engine being on Apple devices and so forth?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many benefits that can flow from having a market where other search engines and other companies have a fair shot. One, as you suggested, could be a difference in business model, right? Google, as you noted, monetizes its service basically through surveilling people, surveilling their online activity, sometimes their offline activity, and using that vast trove of personal data on you to basically sell to advertisers and businesses to then target you, right? And so there's an enormous amount of tracking that happens. If you are somebody who cares much more about your privacy, if you don't want this type of tracking, ideally there would be search engines that you could use that would be just as effective but wouldn't have that trade-off. Maybe you would pay with money, there would be some other form of compensation. And so other alternative business models have been totally crowded out. The other place where you could see healthy competition is the type of algorithm, right? I mean, search engines work by people inputting a search term and then the search results page offering responses that are curated, that are sequenced in a way that is designed to, maximize the chance that you find what you're looking for. there's no one secret sauce to one magic algorithm. And in fact, we've heard complaints from businesses, from users about how this algorithm has actually gotten worse over time, or Google very famously has been increasing the number of ads on the search results page. So if you look something up, if you're on your phone, it could take 2 screens to actually get to organic results.
Very true.
Rather than paid.
Absolutely.
And that is a degradation of the service.
Yeah.
And because Google is a monopoly, it's not having to compete with some other firm that could say, well, we're actually not going to have as many ads and we're going to use a slightly different algorithm that maybe works better. And so that's another form of competition that people have been deprived of because of Google's illegal monopolization.
We are not yet at the remedy stage of this. Google was found to have maintained an illegal monopoly. What are some of the remedies?
So this is something that the government is engaged in a conversation with the court about. There are various potential remedies. I mean, the important thing to think about is, as an antitrust enforcer, you want a remedy that stops the illegal behavior, prevents it from recurring, and importantly, prevents the lawbreaker from benefiting from the lawbreaking, right? I mean, when you have illegal monopolization, you sometimes have a company that for years has been able to chase market share illegally. And if all you say is, okay, going forward, you can't do that, that's letting it basically reap the rewards of its lawbreaking. And so you need a remedy that's curing that, that's disincentivizing firms from following that playbook. In this instance, we're still waiting to see what the ultimate remedy is going to look like. One of the suggestions that has been put forward is a divestiture of Chrome. The Chrome browser, critically, is one of the key pathways to using search engines. And so one of the arguments the government has made is Google divesting this would actually create more competition. There's also been discussion around how do you AI-proof this remedy, right? How do we make sure that Google is not using the benefits of its law breaking to get a leg up in some of these AI markets? And so should it have to, license its search index to make it easier for some of these other companies to get in? And so those are some of the considerations.
Okay, very interesting. Waiting for the breakup. The lawsuit that the federal government initiated against Meta, the parent company of Facebook, which argues that the company built an illegal monopoly in social media by acquiring Instagram and acquiring WhatsApp, not because they needed it, but to keep them from competing with Facebook. Explain why that so-called buyer bury strategy might violate the law.
So this lawsuit is responding to the fact that Facebook had done well in the desktop market, but as people started using smartphones, Facebook started to fall behind. And it recognized that smartphones were going to be the future of how people are using these social media services. And despite it trying new apps and new features, it just kept falling further and further behind. Facebook recognized that Instagram and WhatsApp were skyrocketing in popularity. And it worried that these firms could build alternative social networks that could basically overtake and replace Facebook. And it felt threatened by that. But instead of being able to organically compete, it went out and bought these companies for billions of dollars. Instagram for $1 billion, WhatsApp for $19 billion. And the FTC ultimately concluded that these acquisitions were illegal. And the public has been harmed by being deprived of the fair competition that would have existed.
Now, in that particular case, it was actually brought, it preceded your time as FTC chair. It was thrown out by a judge, and then you refiled it. That suggests that there's some room among reasonable people to differ about when the law has been violated.
So that's right. The Trump administration filed this case originally in December 2020. A judge tossed it out in the summer of 2021, a few days after I took the helm at the FTC, and we refiled it that summer. And then we succeeded in moving forward. It is true that despite deep partisanship, antitrust and questions around monopoly power have actually attracted bipartisan support and bipartisan agreement. And we have seen some degree of continuity from the first Trump administration to the Biden administration to the second Trump administration. I do worry now about ways that some of these cases could go totally off the rails with this administration, just given that the White House seems to want to use law enforcement as a tool to punish enemies and rewards friends.
Right.
And so that lawfare type behavior I worry about. But generally speaking, there has been some sliver of bipartisan agreement that when it comes to monopoly power and the unchecked economic concentration of power of big corporations, that we need to hold that to account.
When you say December 2020, I'm wondering if political considerations, in your opinion, were present in the filing of that, because it happened, I guess, after Trump lost the election.
It's possible. I mean, it's very,
they certainly blamed Facebook for their loss. Yeah.
Oh, that's true. I mean, these cases, follow usually, investigations that have gone on for months and months. So I don't think anybody thought that after the election, this was filed for political purposes in that sense. And actually, the vote breakdown at the FTC was kind of unusual. It was the Republican chair joining up with the two Democratic commissioners to file it, and then two other Republicans dissenting.
Oh, interesting.
So unusual politics here.
Is there a predictable or partisan way to sort of determine in advance how an administration will view these matters? I mean, we all are taught in middle school that, Theodore Roosevelt was the big trust buster, and he kind of made that part of his politics in a very definable way. You don't hear it so much from presidential candidates these days.
Well, sometimes you do. I mean, in the 2020 election, in the Democratic primary, for example, we heard, Senator Klobuchar talk a lot about antitrust, Senator Warren talk about it. And it's come up in various local races, state races, where, Senator Rosen in Nevada, for example, campaigned on the fact that the FTC under the Biden administration sued to block the Kroger-Albertsons merger, which would have been one of the largest grocery mergers in U.S. history. We've seen at the state and local level members talk about right to repair. And when companies make it difficult to easily fix your own products or go to an independent repair shop, that inflates costs, but also deprives independent businesses. We've heard people talk about these non-compete clauses, which trap workers. And so, antitrust, when you talk about it as a general matter, can sound kind of arcane.
Right.
But the ways that firms may illegally abuse their power to hurt you in your day-to-day life, be it through you having to pay more, you making less at your job, or independent businesses being squeezed, that's happening everywhere across the country. And we actually do see more and more policymakers, more and more elected officials recognize what a big problem this is that is affecting their constituents, and candidly realizing that it's good politics.
Well, yeah. When it comes to monopoly and antitrust activity, I know that there are, there's something like 6 meat packers in the whole country, or who have almost all of the market. That it really crosses a lot of different industries, the railroads and a bunch of others. But those folks can also buy a lot of lobbying power, and they can make a lot of contributions. Did you find that there was a lot of pushback to what you were doing?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, with great economic power comes big political power. And we see that through the role of big money in our elections. But we also see it in a more mundane way in just the day-to-day power that big companies have in Washington, D.C., through the armies of lawyers and lobbyists that they can buy. And one thing that was a big priority for me at the FTC was to make sure that we were hearing from Americans across the country, and not just those who could afford to buy a lobbyist to represent them.
Right.
And so we went around the country on listening sessions, listening tours, to really understand what were the biggest pain points that people were facing, and what could we as the FTC do to fix that.
I mean, there's also, there's certainly, avoiding or repairing consumer harm is, undoubtedly top of the agenda. I'm also struck, though, by, some of these other breakups that I talked about in the past, where the Bell system breakup led to unbelievable amounts of wealth that was unlocked and innovation that was spurred. And these baby bells, this is where you get Verizon and Southwest Bell and all of these different companies. And it worked out well for investors. It worked out well for consumers. It worked out well for everybody. I would think that, that compelling sort of argument would be something that more people would talk about.
That's exactly right. I mean, some of these breakups have created enormous wealth, enormous innovation. The antitrust case against Microsoft did not result ultimately in a breakup, but that litigation and the scrutiny kept Microsoft from squashing companies like Google and Amazon and Facebook in the crib because it recognized that the government was scrutinizing its conduct. And so we've certainly seen investors recognize that. Even as these antitrust trials are proceeding, we see investors talk about how a Google breakup or even an Amazon breakup could actually create more wealth and more innovation.
Well, yeah, Amazon is just crying out to be broken up. I mean, I just can't even get over it. I mean, they have... they control your doorbell. They have listening devices in millions of homes. They're monitoring, the device will start talking to you and say, hey, want to buy some more detergent? I mean, and then of course their listings where, it's sort of a quote unquote marketplace where anybody can put in an ad. And lo and behold, right above where they list the goods that are available, there's the Amazon one right above it. I mean, I've got to assume if it's not going to be the government, it'll be private actors who try and make that happen at some point.
So the FTC also filed a case against Amazon while I was there. And we've laid out the ways that Amazon illegally has solidified its power, kept out rivals, and how it's the public that is now overpaying as a result, as well as businesses. I mean, businesses that sell on Amazon sometimes have to hand over as much as $1 out of every $2 to Amazon.
Wow.
They're paying a 50% tax, monopoly tax.
Wow.
And so I think there's, a lot of competition and innovation that could come back into the market if Amazon had to follow the law.
Yeah. I mean, anecdotally, I go on Amazon because I'm looking for, ingredients for a particular vegan dish. And they're showing me all kinds of meat and fish and dairy and all the stuff that I specifically, I'm saying I do not want. And then right next to each one, sponsored, so they're like, you have to walk past, so to speak, this whole aisle of stuff that we want to sell you before you can get to what you actually came here for.
That's right. And the FTC actually discovered through its investigation that there was actually a decision point within Amazon about whether to continue prioritizing organic results so that if you typed in vegan, only show you vegan stuff,
right,
or whether they should sell more of the space to advertisers, even if it gives you non-vegan stuff.
Right.
And they basically decided, we are such a monopoly. We have so much power that we can get away with doing what is worse for the customer.
Wow.
So showing you meat results because they knew they don't face any competition.
Wow. Yeah, okay. Somebody's going to have to do something about that. They may have to call you back into service, Professor. Well, listen, thanks very much. What should people be looking out for? Where's the next? I guess we didn't talk about possible remedies in the case of Meta. Is the idea that they would have to undo those mergers? Is that what the government would be asking for?
Exactly. The
put Instagram out as a separate company.
Yes, the divestiture of Instagram and WhatsApp are on the table, and we'll see, what the judge decides and what the government argues. I would say, we've been talking mostly about the tech cases, but you're absolutely right that in agriculture, in healthcare, in all sorts of nooks and crannies within our economy, we've seen so much consolidation that people don't have a lot of choice, and companies are increasingly able to get away with abusing their power.
They sell us this fiction that it's just easier. And on one level, it pretty much is. I mean, I have to consciously not buy a book, including an audio book from Amazon, right? Because it's just so much easier, right? They already control Audible. They already have Kindle. You already got, in my case, dozens, if not hundreds of books that are already on that platform. So yes, I could go and find my way over to another platform, but it's just that much easier, right?
And those friction points really matter, right? I mean, one of the arguments that some of the big tech companies make, and Google made for years, was, well, so what if Google search is dominant? Competition is just one click away. There's nobody preventing you from typing in another search engine.
Right.
And that just misses the reality of how consumers behave, how online markets work, and the friction and the stickiness, and the fact that the more you use Google, the better it becomes because it's using your data to refine its algorithm.
Sure.
And that the harder and harder it is for rivals to catch up. And so even incremental uses of, illegal conduct can create a huge lag between Google and everybody else.
Okay. Well, look, I thank you so much for clarifying so many of these issues. This is one of these things that just operates in the background, sort of like Google, actually. And we need to keep an eye on it to make sure that, we get the robust competition that everybody deserves, and we stop having our commercial rights stripped away from us little by some of these monopolies. Thanks a whole lot. Great to talk with you.
Thanks for having me.
If you want to keep up with what's happening in New York politics and hear more conversations with the people shaping the future of New York and beyond, subscribe to our channel. And let Spectrum News be your resource for balanced, in-depth political coverage, elections, and issues that matter to you.